There is a new product sense question in town. It's called the AI product sense question, and it's scaring all product managers. But in this video, I'm going to take the standard product sense question framework, add one element to each of the steps in that framework, and convert it into an AI product sense framework. We're going to do this as a live working session on a Miro board on shared screen so that you can follow with me and understand my approach to this. Now, first of all, let's take a standard question and an AI product sense equivalent of that, and then we will start adding the elements of a standard framework and then converting it into your AI product sense framework. So let's get started. I'm going to put two sticky notes side by side. There's one in yellow. This is your standard product sense question. The question is to design a better product discovery experience for an e-commerce application. And right next to it, I'm going to add another sticky note, which is going to be my AI product sense question. And I'm going to put the question out here as well. So the question is very simple. This is design a Gen AI shopping assistant for an e-commerce application, right? So two questions: design a better product discovery experience for an e-commerce app. This is my standard product sense question. And then this is the AI product sense question. All right, now let's look at the framework that we are going to use for a normal product sense question and then convert it into AI product sense. I'm going to just take a sticky stack on Miro and just going to put it here so that it's easier for me to pick out notes. I'm going to call it product sense here, just align it all good. And then I'm going to put some simple rectangles and talk about the framework there, right? So everything in yellow is the normal product sense for you to follow. Now, the typical framework here is to clarify, of course, then to pick the user or the user persona if I am being accurate about it, then to find the user pain points. Once you've figured out the user's pain points, you then go to designing solutions. Once you've designed solutions, you prioritize solutions. And once you've prioritized solutions, you would go and give metrics. And then finally, evaluate trade-offs, right? Of course, at the end, you summarize after all of this, but this is your typical flow, right? There are 7 steps: clarify, pick the persona, find the pain points, design solutions, prioritize solutions, give metrics, and evaluate trade-offs, right? Now, let's understand what happens in a typical product sense round. And then for each step, I'm going to convert this into an AI product sense round for the example that we've taken here. So we'll first focus on clarify, right? I'm just going to pull a sticky note here for us to look at clarify and then understand. Now, typically in a clarification question for a normal product sense question, you're going to talk about standard steps. You're going to talk about, what kind of users are we targeting? Do we have any constraints in mind? What is the role that you're playing? All of that. What place of the funnel we are talking about? What device we are looking at? All of that normal stuff. So I'm just going to put that here, right? So I'm going to put that here as pieces. So yeah, which category, which part of the funnel, what's the device, what's the goal, is it GMV or conversion? So all of those would be typical standard questions that you would end up asking when you're talking about designing a better product experience, product discovery experience for an e-commerce app, right? But let's take another sticky stack here, right? And we will, of course, color this in purple because that's AI product sense for us. And I've just named this AI product sense, right? And I'm just going to put a note from this here as well, right? Now, for the AI product sense, it's very important for you to understand what changes. What essentially changes for an AI product sense interview round for this clarification step is that specificity increases, right? Which means that instead of focusing on a more generic direction, you actually focus on more specific things. Let me explain how. In this example that we are taking here, where we are designing a shopping assistant for an e-commerce application, what happens is if we allow the entire AI assistant to work broadly, to work on almost any use case, it's going to fail. which is why the clarification questions are super important, where you of course ask the standard questions, but on top of it, you ask specific questions about the journey, the inventory that's going to be available, and also the scope of the AI assistant. Let me tell you how. The first question that you're going to ask is about which part of the discovery are we focusing on, right? Now, why are we doing this? We are doing this because we don't want to be in a situation where we are focusing on an entire set of product discoveries and the AI assistant is going to have a mammoth task to be able to do it. Now, this is where your AI knowledge comes into play. If you are aware of how Gen AI works, you know that context window matters. You know that you cannot have an AI assistant built quickly, which will have the ability to go through large inventories of platforms like Amazon, Shopify, Flipkart, etc. Right. Now, we're going to move further where. Now, this is where it's important. Now, the other thing you can make it focused is you can improve this question further by adding a few options for the interviewer. So what we can say here is that, is it for groceries or garments? So you're trying to give the interviewer options of what they can see or what they can use here, right? Apart from this, there is another layer that you could use. What is that layer? The layer is the method of output, right? Which is it going to be a chatbot or voice assistant or something else, right? So essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to scope it down for me so that I can focus on one piece, right? The way a chat assistant is going to be designed from an AI product sense angle versus the way a voice assistant will be designed are going to be completely different, right? So that is basically how you're going to do it, right? So that's the first set of extra clarification questions that you have to ask when you're doing an AI product sense round. Let's call these questions scope narrowers. I know it's incorrect English, but just for you to understand. Now, what these kind of questions do is they reduce the scope of your AI implementation, right? The second kind of question is, what kind of access do I have in terms of engineers? Do I have data scientists that can fine-tune models? Do I have engineers, which means that do I have data scientists that can help me fine-tune models, or do I have standard software engineers that can use models out of the box? What's the kind of ecosystem I'm working in? These two questions, very simple questions and very easy to help you understand where you can go in this direction. So two simple questions and easy to narrow down your scope and easy to figure out what role are you playing and give you a clear-cut answer, right? I'm just going to give this a heading as well. I'm just going to give this a heading called role clarifiers, right? Just going to zoom it in first so that you can see it, right? So these are your two types of questions that get added to the standard clarification questions whenever an AI product sense question appears. Now remember, I'm not saying that this is irrelevant. These normal product sense clarification questions are as relevant, but these two types that you see here in blue have to be added on top of it, right? So that is how you improve your clarification questions whenever you are answering. That is how you improve your clarification questions when the interviewer goes from product sense to AI product sense. Now, let's quickly move to the other ones. The next bit is to pick the user persona, right? I'm just going to grab another sticky note here, and I'm going to talk about what all you need to do in a standard product sense question from a user persona perspective. So normally what you do is you split your user persona by behavior. You of course add certain demographics to it. You of course add certain usage patterns to it. But mainly what you do is you split your persona based on behavior. You do it so that your personas are not static. So what you could do is you could segment your users via new users versus old users, big spenders versus users who don't spend as much, then users who spend out of necessity versus users who spend in joy, and so on and so forth, right? I'm just going to put all of these here so that you have versions here. On top of it, you could add their demographics. So demographics like their income category, their gender, the tier of the city they live in, whether they live in urban or rural, those kind of things, right? So I'm just going to remove this and showcase this clearly to you. So this is what you do in the older user persona method when you are solving a standard product sense question. Now, let's try and understand how the user persona changes when you get an AI product sense question. I'm just going to pull another note in blue here, and I'm going to talk about what changes. Now, what changes for an AI product sense question when it comes to user persona is the user persona that AI can help the most. It's a very simple concept. Now, understand this, right? Typically what would happen is you would pick up the most high value persona, right? You would pick up someone who's buying the most, you would pick up someone who is in a position to give you the most money, and so on and so forth, right? Which makes a lot of sense. But there is one fundamental change that has happened with AI coming in, which is that now AI can assist people it would not have been able to assist earlier. So for example, earlier on, if there was someone who was buying a sunscreen and they saw SPF 50, they might not have understood what it meant. But now they can just talk to an AI agent, or they can chat with an AI agent, tell that person or that AI agent rather what they would want, and the AI agent is going to give them the right recommendations. So while normally you would pick a high value persona, someone who's buying the most, in an AI case, you would probably pick the persona who is benefited by AI most. So what happens is filter by persona who benefits the most with AI. Right? So what we are trying to do here is we are trying to find a persona that's benefited the most via AI. So typically this persona is someone who cannot articulate what they need. So in our case, what would happen is, who are these people who cannot articulate what they need? These people would be people who have less knowledge of certain niche products, typically maybe from tier 2, tier 3 towns. There would be people who might not know the language of the e-commerce product that you've built. So they might not know the entire English that you've written on your product, and so on and so forth. Right? So that is what I'm going to pick, right? So I'm going to pick the confused user, the one who's exploring the entire thing, the one who's not sure of what they want, and so on and so forth. So that would be my goal here. So that's a big change between a product sense and an AI product sense. In product sense, you try and find a persona who's high value but has some needs that are unmet. In an AI product sense question, you flip that. In an AI product sense question, you don't target the high value user as long as they are able to make cognitive use of your product. Oh, well and good. You pick the people who are struggling with making the cognitive use of your product. So the typical persona that is there is the persona that quote unquote finds your product tough. Now this could be because the product is in a different language. It could be because the product just doesn't make sense to them. It could be because it uses technical terms that they don't understand. But that's the big change that you make in an AI product sense question. You move from picking up standard personas who are typically the high value ones to someone who is most benefited by AI, and that someone is typically someone who cannot articulate or who cannot understand your product well. Right. Now, once we've got these, right, once we've understood that there is a change in the clarification questions and then there is a change in the user persona, let's move to what happens in the pain points, right? I'm just going to pull another yellow one here, and I'm just going to talk about the pain points. So typically what would happen is in the pain point exercise, you would map the user journey. And then from there, you would find friction points. And from the friction points, you would identify pain points for the user. Right? Fair enough. Very straightforward way of finding pain points for a particular user in a standard product sense question. There's one big thing that changes when you find these problems from an AI perspective. Now let's understand what changes when you try to find out pain points from an AI product sense angle. Now for a normal product sense, you try and find out pain points that are more broad, that are unsolved for a long time, basically unmet needs. But in an AI product sense problem, I'm just going to pick a blue note as well to show this to you. In an AI product sense problem, what you pick is you pick problems where decisions become overwhelming. Right? Now think about what AI can do, right? AI can go through millions of pages on your website, go through millions of decisions on your app, and take those decisions for you, right? or in our example, in the e-commerce example that we've been taking, looking at 1000 phone options on the page and recommending you the right one based on your preferences is an exact pain point that AI can solve. Take an example of Uber, right? Looking at all the options available, booking the right Uber for you based on the time you have to arrive at office, based on your calendar, and all of that is the right way for AI to use. So the biggest use case that you can look at Gen AI in any of the products right now is to reduce overwhelming decisions, right? So I'm not going to pick standard problems of users not being able to find the right match, not being able to find the right fit of the clothes, not being able to find the right options, brands. Those are all standard product sense problems. When I'm solving something from an AI product angle, I'm going to solve overwhelming decision making. That's the number one unlock that I'm going to do. And that's what you need to take away from this session as well. Figure out problems in the same user journey where users are supposed to take decisions, replace those decisions by LLMs as long as it makes logical sense to have the LLM take the decisions. I'm going to pick a simple pain point around how users have so many options that they don't know what's best suited for them. Sometimes they cannot even decide what makes sense for them to pick. Right? So this is basically, a simple pain point. I've just mapped it to my logical understanding, which is the fact that I have figured out a way by which there are overwhelming decisions that I need to get rid of, and I'm using an LLM to get rid of those decisions, right? So that's how I go ahead and change the pain points for an AI product sense question. Now, moving to the next bit, and this is probably the most major shift that comes product sense versus AI product sense, and this is the solutions that you design. Now, typically, you would design a solution that would be based on screens. So you would design screen by screen solutions whenever you solve a product sense question. So you would go ahead and build screen 1, screen 2, screen 3, all the flows, and you're going to use those flows to communicate to the interviewer that this is what my solution is going to be. Fair enough. But there is a fundamental thing that changes in an AI product sense question. Let's look at what. In an AI product sense question, you move away from the screen to designing the infrastructure behind the screen. Now, what happens is typically in AI products, the way your users interact with your product remains the same. It's either through chat, through voice, through audio notes, could be anything from similar lines, but it's usually a 1-to-2 interaction, right? Which is why it does not make sense for us to spend a lot of time on the screen part of things when we are doing an AI product sense question. Let's try and understand what the expectation is when interviewers want us to design solutions for AI product sense. I'm just going to pull another one here. And what they want is they want you to design the infra behind the UI, right? Now, what does this infra mean? This infra means system prompts. This infra means user prompts. This could mean RAG. This could mean agentic implementation. And this could mean fine-tuning the model, right? Of course, I don't mean to say that you need to implement all of these, but you need to figure out which ones make sense. The expectation that the interviewer has is for you to talk about the kind of system prompts you will design behind the chatbot or behind the voice bot that you're going to build. They want you to talk about, can you implement RAG? Are you going to implement RAG? Is fine-tuning required for this particular product, which is why knowledge on each of these three is extremely important. Now, of course, I would cover these in other videos and in my program, so you can check that out. The link for that would be in the description. But the essence of it is that you need to ensure that you are very well versed with these implementations to do well in the AI product sense round. Now, in our question, we are going to actually take an understanding of this. We are, of course, going to engineer prompts. So we have to talk about what prompt engineering is, how we are going to engineer system prompts, how is this bot going to behave. We, of course, are going to implement RAG, which basically means we are going to create a way by which documents are chunked, stored, and then retrieved whenever there is a discussion that a user is doing with our AI chatbot or voice assistant, whatever we decide to build. We're going to talk about how different user prompts are going to be handled, and we may also talk about agentic behavior. So we may want our shopping assistants to make orders or place orders on the behalf of users. So now this requires us to implement agentic behavior. So we may want to talk about that as well, right? So that is how the fundamental solution changes. And this is the biggest change that has come in when AI product sense comes in, where now the expectation is not to design the screen, the user flow, and all of that. The expectation is to talk about what prompts you're going to use. The expectation is to talk about whether you will need RAG. If you will need RAG, are you going to use semantic chunking? Are you going to use hybrid chunking, and all of that? If those terms don't make sense, then you need to spend time on learning AI PM, on learning all about AI product management. And of course, like I said, PyProgram is a good way to start. Now, moving on. We're going to move on to the next piece, which is prioritizing solutions. Now, this is a piece where things are more of the same. There is not much change in prioritizing this, but I'm still going to put a white note here where you use frameworks like Rice, you could use frameworks like Moscow, you could use frameworks like impact versus effort, standard frameworks that you could figure out to prioritize your solution. Now, this fundamental remains the same in AI product sense as well. It doesn't change much. The only thing that changes is the cost, right? Now, in prioritizing solutions, cost gets somewhere lost in the effort. But whenever you look at models, whenever you look at how AI products are built, there is a tangible and there is a objective amount that you spend on those AI models, right? So you add cost to the conversation, right? Which means that the amount of cost that the models will take, the amount of tokens that it will take, and so on and so forth, right? So you basically add the amount of money that you would be spending on tokens, because building the prompts, engineering that, changing that, all of that is very straightforward, right? But the cost, every single message that a user sends, the AI receives, the AI response, is money that you would pay to OpenAI, Anthropic, Grok, could be anything, right? So important piece that you need to add is to add cost to the conversation. The second important piece that you need to know is also behavior, right? Now, most of AI products also include behavior change, right? Now, I am used to clicking a button and placing an order. I'm not used to telling a chatbot to place an order for me, which is why whenever you have a behavioral change, you kind of budget the bigger timeline for that behavioral change to happen, because it wouldn't happen so fast, right? This is a lesser important piece, but the most important piece is that you add cost to the conversation. So in this question, apart from the Rice, Moscow, impact, effort, whatever I choose to use, I'm also going to talk about tokens. So I'm going to talk about how we cannot have the queries we cannot have a lot of back and forth. So we will prioritize implementation of a smaller MVP. We'll prioritize implementation where the model responds briefly, where the users can maybe send answers that are pre-templated, so that we don't fall into the trap of spending a lot of money on my tokens, right? Very simple, very similar, just one piece added there. Now let's go to metrics. Now, typically what you would do is you would look at standard stuff. You would look at click-through rates, you would look at success of search, you would look at conversion, GMB, average order value, all that kind of stuff, right? All of this is great. We'll just put that all out here as well. I'm just going to pull in a yellow note again, and I'm just going to put it out here. So you're going to probably talk about CTRs. You're going to talk about success rate of recommendation. You can maybe talk about the checkout funnel, all of those things, right? Typical standard things that you would do, right? You could also, of course, talk about GMV. You could talk about average order value, all these things, right? Standard basic stuff. There are two fundamental things that change when you add AI to the conversation of metrics. What are those fundamental things? The first is the repeat rate, right? Now, this is almost mandatory for you whenever you're designing any AI product sense problem statement. If the user does not come back and use your product again and again, it's almost useless, right? So you have to make sure that people use your product properly. You have to make sure that they come back and use your product again and again. So that's why repeat rate is the most important piece that you add. And the second thing that we've already talked about that you add is the cost per conversation, right? Because of the token cost involved with AI, you can never leave this out of the window. You always have to ensure that you are doing enough to understand the cost per conversation as well. Right, those are the two things that you add. There is one more piece that you can add, and that's something that a lot of interviewers expect is the latency per conversation, which is basically talking about the waiting time, right? AI takes this time to think. So what's the amount of time that a user needs to wait before they have gotten the response, right? Of course, this is directly linked to the repeat rate and the other metrics. So you keep the standard yellow metrics, but you add these 2 or 3 more metrics in an AI product sense round. Now, finally, you evaluate trade-offs. You evaluate risks. So here I'm going to talk about your standard stuff, like frauds, failed recommendation systems. I can maybe talk about, abuse of the platform, right? All of those kind of standard stuff, right? But with AI, a few things get added, right? What is the biggest thing? Like I said, always one of the biggest things that get added is the cost of running the agent. So you have to emphasize on the amount of money that this can go to if the agent picks up. Another very important piece that gets added is hallucination, which means that you have to talk about how you're going to mitigate hallucination. So I'm just going to write that as well. Hallucination and evals, which is what are the evals that you're going to do so that you prevent hallucination. Now you cannot 100% prevent hallucination, but you can reduce it. So what are the methods that you're going to use to reduce the hallucination? Now, once again, if you don't understand what hallucination is and what evals are, you need to dedicatedly spend more time on understanding AI product management. And of course, my program offers a good support for you to do that. But apart from this, what can also happen as a trade-off is privacy, right? So you need to talk about the privacy of user data and how you're going to either bind down the contracts of the models that you're going to use or host the models in-house. How are you going to basically take care of privacy? Because this is going to be user data that users are going to share with you. This may have sensitive data. This may have data that you don't want going out of your company. So you have to ensure that privacy is a big conversation when you evaluate trade-offs. Finally, the last bit that you have to look at is bias, right? Now, why bias? Because what happens in AI models is that they can push unfair recommendations, right? If someone is searching for something and your model keeps recommending the same brand without any history of that brand being categorically better than others, then it's a bias. Then you're not a free marketplace anymore. So that's an important thing that you need to add as well. So of course, trade-offs are usually ignored. They're the last step. You finish it off. But in an AI product sense question, they take a very, very important role. They become, crazily important. And that's why you have to spend a good amount of time on trade-offs. Finally, the summary piece remains exactly the same, where you summarize everything. But essentially, this is how your landscape looks like, right? You begin with clarification questions. You add scope narrowers and role clarifiers in AI. Then in user persona, you try to find the persona that AI can benefit the most. Then in pain points, you figure out places where decisions are overwhelming and AI can take the call of improving those decisions. Then when you design those solutions, instead of looking at screens, you pick a standard AI interaction template like a chat or a voice and talk about the system prompts, the user prompts, RAG. Do you need fine tuning? If there is an agentic behavior required, if there is an MCP integration required, and all of that. When you prioritize based on impact effort, but also the cost of running this entire operation, and also the fact that this leads a big behavior change in your users, and can you build that? In metrics, repeat rate becomes extremely important. You spend a lot of time on the repeat rate, and of course the cost of the conversation and the latency. And then evaluation takes a whole new way, right? Instead of just finishing it as a checkmark item, you spend time on the cost of running the agent, how you're going to write evals and reduce hallucination, how you're going to ensure privacy, and then how are you going to eliminate bias. So that is the changes that you need to do. Of course, just one question is not enough. You would need to practice 10, 15, 20 AI product sense questions to get through this, which is why I've prepared a set of questions and I've added the link in the description of this video. So go access them and practice them. I will be posting the solutions to those questions as well in another video on my YouTube channel. So please do subscribe it. And I really hope this was helpful. So go ahead, practice those questions and nail that product sense interview. All the very best.